At 6:38 on the morning of August 10th, 2019, inside one of the most secure federal jails in the United States, guards discovered the body of inmate number 76318-054. He was found in his cell, unresponsive, a piece of bedsheet tied around his neck. This was Jeffrey Epstein, a man whose name had become synonymous with wealth, power, and horrific crimes against the young. He was the country's most high-profile prisoner, held on charges of sex trafficking minors. He had been placed on suicide watch just weeks earlier, then taken off. His death in the special housing unit of the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan was officially ruled a suicide, but the circumstances surrounding his final hours were anything but simple. The two guards assigned to his unit had fallen asleep. Two security cameras positioned to record the area outside his cell had malfunctioned. In the immediate aftermath, a question formed, one that would echo through the halls of power and across the internet, a question that remains unanswered to this day. How could a man who held the secrets of the world's most powerful people die so conveniently in a place from which there was supposed to be no escape? To understand the end, one had to look at the beginning. Jeffrey Epstein's origins were surprisingly modest, a world away from the private islands and sprawling mansions that would later define his life. He was born in Brooklyn in 1953, the son of a groundskeeper and a school aide. He attended Cooper Union and later New York University, but he never graduated from either. Despite his lack of a college degree, he landed a teaching position at the prestigious Dalton School in Manhattan, where he taught physics and mathematics in the mid-1970s. It was there he made his first influential connections through the parents of his students. One of those connections was Alan Greenberg, the CEO of the investment bank Bear Stearns. Impressed by Epstein's intellect and ambition, Greenberg hired him in 1976. Epstein rose quickly through the ranks, demonstrating a talent for complex financial instruments and an even greater talent for cultivating relationships with the firm's wealthiest clients. In 1981, he was made a limited partner at Bear Stearns. However, his tenure ended abruptly just a few years later. The official reasons for his departure remained murky, with reports citing violations of internal company rules. Yet he left the firm not in disgrace, but with the foundation of a network that would become his greatest asset. In 1982, he founded his own firm, J. Epstein and Company. This was the true beginning of the mystery surrounding his fortune. The firm was intensely private, and its client list was a closely guarded secret. For years, it was rumored that he managed money exclusively for billionaires, taking on only those with a net worth of $1 billion or more. One name consistently linked to his financial success was Les Wexner, the billionaire founder of L Brands, which included Victoria's Secret. Epstein became Wexner's close financial advisor, and for a time he held a sweeping power of attorney over Wexner's vast fortune. This relationship provided Epstein with a veneer of legitimacy and, investigators later believed, an immense source of capital. But the source of his wealth remained a subject of intense speculation. He claimed to be a financial genius, a bounty hunter for lost assets, and a tax expert for the ultra-rich. Yet no one could ever fully trace the origins of the hundreds of millions of dollars that funded his lavish lifestyle. This lifestyle was designed to attract and impress the global elite. He acquired a fleet of properties that served as stages for his networking. There was the sprawling Zorro Ranch in New Mexico, a 7,500-acre estate where he entertained scientists and intellectuals. There was a luxurious apartment in Paris near the Arc de Triomphe. His primary residence was a 7-story, 40-room mansion on East 71st Street in Manhattan, one of the largest private homes in the city. Visitors described its bizarre and unsettling decor. Rows of individual eyeballs commissioned from a prosthetics maker, a chess set with custom figurines modeled after his staff in suggestive attire, and a framed photograph of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia. But the crown jewel of his real estate portfolio was a private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Officially named Little St. James, it was known to locals by a more sinister moniker, Pedophile Island. It was here, far from prying eyes, that the darkest allegations against him would eventually be centered. A strange temple-like structure with a golden dome was built on the highest point of the island, its purpose unknown. Aboard his private Boeing 757, nicknamed the Lolita Express, Epstein traversed the globe. Its flight logs, later made public through court proceedings, read like a who's who of international power brokers. They included names like former U.S. President Bill Clinton, future U.S. President Donald Trump, and Britain's Prince Andrew, the Duke of York. He cultivated relationships with renowned scientists like Stephen Hawking and Murray Gell-Mann, with politicians like former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak and former New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson. He donated to universities like Harvard, securing a place among intellectuals and academics. He presented himself not merely as a financier, but as a philanthropist and a man of science. This carefully constructed world of influence and respectability served a dual purpose. It gave him access to the highest echelons of society, and it created a powerful shield of credibility. For years, this shield proved impenetrable, even as whispers and rumors about his conduct began to circulate. The first significant cracks in this shield appeared in 2005. A woman in Palm Beach, Florida, contacted the local police with a disturbing story. She claimed her 14-year-old stepdaughter had been paid to give Epstein a massage at his mansion and had been sexually assaulted. The police launched an investigation, led by Officer Joe Riccari. What they uncovered was not an isolated incident, but a pattern. They found dozens of potential victims, many of them underage girls from troubled backgrounds. The accounts were chillingly similar. The girls described being recruited by other young women and brought to Epstein's Palm Beach home. They were told they would be paid hundreds of dollars for erotic massages. Once there, they alleged Epstein would sexually abuse them. The investigation suggested a systematic and organized criminal enterprise. At the center of this operation, according to many of the victims, was a woman named Ghislaine Maxwell, the daughter of the disgraced British media tycoon Robert Maxwell. She was Epstein's former girlfriend and his constant companion. Witnesses described her as Epstein's principal recruiter, the one who allegedly used her social standing and charm to groom and procure young girls for him. The Palm Beach police built what they believed was a strong case. They presented their findings to the state attorney's office. But as the investigation moved from the local level to the federal level, something strange happened. The momentum slowed and the direction of the case shifted. The federal prosecutor for the Southern District of Florida at the time was U.S. Attorney Alexander Acosta. His office took over the investigation, and for more than a year, the case seemed to languish behind closed doors. The victims and their families were left in the dark, unaware of the deal that was being negotiated on their behalf. In 2008, the world learned the outcome. Jeffrey Epstein would not face federal charges for sex trafficking. Instead, his lawyers had secretly negotiated a non-prosecution agreement, or NPA, with Acosta's office. It was an arrangement of unprecedented leniency. Under the terms of the deal, Epstein pleaded guilty to 2 state-level prostitution charges, one of which involved a minor. He was required to register as a sex offender and pay restitution to his victims. The agreement also granted federal immunity from all future prosecution to Epstein and any potential co-conspirators. The identities of these unnamed co-conspirators were sealed, a detail that would become critically important years later. The deal effectively shut down the entire federal investigation, protecting not just Epstein but his entire network. His punishment was a 13-month sentence in a county jail. Even this was served under extraordinary conditions. He was granted work release, which allowed him to leave the jail for up to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, to go to his office. He served his time, and by 2010 he was a free man. For nearly a decade, the case faded from public view. Epstein quietly resumed his life of luxury and influence, flying around the world and hosting powerful guests. The victims were left with a sense of profound injustice, their stories silenced by a secret legal maneuver. The dam of silence finally broke in November 2018. The Miami Herald, led by investigative reporter Julie K. Brown, published a groundbreaking series titled Perversion of Justice. The series meticulously detailed the original Palm Beach investigation and exposed the secret non-prosecution deal that had allowed Epstein to escape serious consequences. The reporting brought national attention to the case, sparking public outrage. It revealed how the justice system had failed the victims and raised serious questions about the influence Epstein wielded. The series prompted federal prosecutors in a different district, the Southern District of New York, to open a new investigation. Alexander Acosta, who by this time had become the U.S. Secretary of Labor under President Donald Trump, came under intense scrutiny for his role in the 2008 deal. In an attempt to defend his actions, he made a statement that only deepened the mystery. He claimed that he had been told at the time that Epstein was above his pay grade and that Epstein belonged to intelligence. This remark was an explosive revelation. It suggested that Epstein might have been connected to a U.S. or foreign intelligence agency, and that this connection had afforded him protection. Acosta never elaborated on who told him this or which agency Epstein allegedly belonged to, and he soon resigned from his cabinet position amid the controversy. On July 6, 2019, federal agents were waiting for Jeffrey Epstein at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey as his private jet returned from Paris. They arrested him on the tarmac. This time, the charges were federal: sex trafficking and conspiracy to commit sex trafficking. The indictment from the Southern District of New York mirrored the allegations from a decade earlier, but it was broader in scope, covering crimes in both New York and Florida from 2002 to 2005. Prosecutors announced they were not bound by the 2008 non-prosecution agreement. Following his arrest, federal agents raided his Manhattan mansion. What they found inside offered a glimpse into his strange and disturbing world. They seized thousands of photographs of what appeared to be underage girls, some of them stored on compact discs. They found a safe containing piles of cash, diamonds, and a fake passport from a foreign country with Epstein's photo but a different name. The decor itself was a source of public fascination and revulsion. Agents found the bizarre painting of Bill Clinton wearing a blue dress and red heels, lounging in a chair in the Oval Office. The sheer strangeness of the items seemed to confirm that this was not just a criminal, but a man who lived in a world of his own bizarre rules. Epstein pleaded not guilty and was denied bail. He was deemed a flight risk and a danger to the community. He was sent to the Metropolitan Correctional Center, a federal detention facility in Lower Manhattan known for holding high-profile defendants and terrorists. It was here in a cell in the most secure section of the jail that his story would reach its final bewildering chapter. Music. The final month of Jeffrey Epstein's life was spent in the confines of Cell Block 9 South at the MCC. The facility had a reputation for being harsh, but it was also considered one of the most secure in the country. No one had successfully escaped from it. On July 23, 2019, about 2 weeks after his arrival, an incident occurred in his cell. Epstein was found semi-conscious with marks on his neck. His cellmate at the time was Nicholas Tartaglione, a former police officer facing murder charges. Epstein was placed on suicide watch. His lawyers claimed that Tartaglione had assaulted him, a claim Tartaglione's lawyer vehemently denied. Tartaglione's lawyer stated that his client had actually saved Epstein after a suicide attempt. The exact nature of the incident remained unclear, but it established a precedent. The inmate was considered a suicide risk. After about 6 days on suicide watch, where he was held in a special cell with constant observation, Epstein was moved to psychiatric evaluation. On July 30th, against the recommendation of the jail's psychologists, he was taken off suicide watch and returned to the Special Housing Unit, or SHU. He was placed in a cell with a new inmate. However, for reasons that were never fully explained, that cellmate was transferred out on August 9th, the day before Epstein's death. This left Epstein alone in his cell, a violation of the facility's own procedures for inmates recently removed from suicide watch. The protocol for the SHU was strict. Guards were supposed to conduct checks on all inmates every 30 minutes. For a high-profile inmate like Epstein, this protocol was considered especially critical. The two correctional officers assigned to his unit that night were Tova Knoll and Michael Thomas. Both were working overtime shifts. According to the subsequent investigation by the Department of Justice, neither guard conducted the required 30-minute checks for a period of approximately 8 hours. Instead, prosecutors alleged they sat at their desk, browsed the internet for furniture and motorcycles, and slept for at least 2 hours. To cover up their negligence, they then falsified log entries, claiming they had made all the required checks on Epstein and other inmates. Adding to the sequence of failures, 2 cameras directly outside Epstein's cell were found to have malfunctioned. The footage from one camera was unusable. The backup camera had also failed. This meant there was no video evidence of what happened in the hallway outside his cell during the critical hours leading up to his death. At approximately 6:30 a.m. on August 10th, the guards preparing to serve breakfast discovered Epstein. He was on the floor of his cell, a ligature made from an orange bedsheet around his neck. The other end was tied to the top of his bunk bed. Medical staff were summoned, and he was transported to a nearby hospital where he was pronounced dead. The New York City Medical Examiner's Office conducted an autopsy. On August 16th, Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Barbara Sampson announced her conclusion: Epstein's death was a suicide by hanging. The official narrative was one of catastrophic negligence. A series of bureaucratic failures, human error, and remarkable coincidences had aligned to allow the nation's most important prisoner to take his own life. The 2 guards were charged with conspiracy and filing false records. though these charges were later dropped as part of a deferred prosecution agreement. The warden of the MCC was reassigned. But for a public already primed for conspiracy, this explanation was not enough. The story was too neat, the failures too convenient. The man who could have implicated some of the most powerful people on the planet was now permanently silenced, and the system that was supposed to protect him had failed at every conceivable level. The questions began to mount, each one chipping away at the credibility of the official story. The most significant medical challenge to the suicide ruling came from Dr. Michael Baden, a veteran forensic pathologist hired by Epstein's brother, Mark, to observe the autopsy. Dr. Baden pointed to a specific injury. Epstein had sustained multiple fractures in his neck, including a break of the hyoid bone. While such fractures can occur in hangings, particularly in older individuals, Baden argued they were far more common in cases of homicidal strangulation. He publicly stated that the evidence was more consistent with homicide than suicide. The official medical examiner's office disputed this, standing by its original finding. They noted that fractures of this kind were not unheard of in suicidal hangings, but Baden's opinion provided a powerful piece of forensic evidence for those who suspected foul play. Then there were the circumstances of the scene itself. Reports from first responders described the cell as being surprisingly orderly. Epstein was found on the floor, not suspended in the air, suggesting he had knelt or leaned forward into the noose. The bed was neatly made. No chair or stool was found kicked over, which is common in hanging suicides. The ligature itself was another point of contention. It was made from a strip of bedsheet, a material that some experts questioned could have supported his weight or exerted enough force to break the bones in his neck in the manner described. The knot was tied to the frame of the top bunk, which was only about 5.5 feet from the floor. The litany of institutional failures at the MCC fueled further suspicion. Why was Epstein taken off suicide watch against the advice of staff psychologists? Who made the final decision? Why was his cellmate removed, leaving him alone in direct violation of protocol? And the cameras? The Department of Justice Inspector General's report later confirmed the malfunctions, but offered no sinister explanation, attributing them to the MCC's chronic state of disrepair and technical incompetence. Yet for many, the simultaneous failure of both the primary and backup cameras outside that specific cell on that specific night stretched the definition of coincidence to its breaking point. The actions of the guards, Tova Nowell and Michael Thomas, were also scrutinized. While their negligence was officially documented, some wondered if it was more than just laziness. Could they have been paid off or threatened to look the other way? Their lawyers maintained that they were scapegoats for a broken and underfunded system. Even the sounds from the cell block that night were a source of contradiction. Some inmates reportedly heard shrieking and shouting, while others heard nothing at all. The acoustics of the concrete and steel unit made it difficult to pinpoint any source of sound. The lack of a clear audio record only added another layer of ambiguity. Each individual failure could perhaps be explained away by incompetence or systemic decay, but the sheer number of them all occurring in sequence to produce a single outcome created a narrative that many found impossible to accept at face value. It felt less like a series of random mistakes and more like a perfectly aligned system of manufactured negligence. Music. In the vacuum of certainty, theories began to form, each attempting to explain the sequence of events on August 10th, 2019. They ranged from the official explanation to complex webs of international conspiracy. The first theory was the simplest. Jeffrey Epstein died by suicide. This remained the official cause of death and the position of the Department of Justice. The proponents of this theory pointed to the immense pressure he was under. He was a man accustomed to absolute control and luxury, now facing the prospect of spending the rest of his life in prison. His reputation was destroyed, his powerful friends had abandoned him, and a trial loomed that would expose the full sordid details of his crimes. He had lost everything. The previous incident on July 23rd, whether a genuine attempt or a cry for help, showed he was in a fragile mental state. In this view, Epstein simply saw no way out and chose to end his own life, and the jail's incompetence gave him the opportunity to do so. The second theory proposed that Epstein was murdered, but not by some shadowy cabal. In this scenario, he was killed by other inmates. The MCC housed dangerous individuals, and Epstein, as a notorious and wealthy sex offender, would have been a prime target. Perhaps an inmate was paid by an outside party, or perhaps it was an act of jailhouse justice. However, this theory had significant weaknesses. Epstein was held in the special housing unit, which was supposed to be the most secure part of the jail. Access to his cell was extremely limited. For another inmate to have reached him, it would have required a level of security breakdown, even greater than what was officially reported. Furthermore, no evidence ever emerged to suggest another inmate was involved. This led to the third and most pervasive theory, that Epstein was murdered as part of a cover-up orchestrated by powerful individuals or state actors. This theory asserted that the sequence of events at the MCC was not a comedy of errors, but a coordinated assassination. The motive was clear: to silence him before he could testify. Epstein, the theory went, held decades of compromising information, blackmail material, or compromat on some of the most powerful people in the world. This information, perhaps recorded on video at his various properties, posed an existential threat to presidents, princes, CEOs, and intelligence figures. A public trial would have been a disaster for them, with Epstein potentially naming names in exchange for a lighter sentence. In this narrative, the sleeping guards were either complicit or deliberately sidelined. The malfunctioning cameras were intentionally disabled. The medical examiner's findings were either mistaken or part of the cover-up. An operative or operatives gained access to his cell during the 8-hour window of no surveillance and staged his death to look like a suicide. This theory drew strength from Alexander Acosta's comment that Epstein belonged to intelligence. This single statement became the cornerstone of a sprawling hypothesis that Epstein was not just a private criminal, but an agent of an intelligence service such as the CIA or Israel's Mossad. According to this line of thinking, his sex trafficking operation was not merely for his own gratification, but was a honeypot operation designed to entrap powerful figures. By videotaping them with underage girls, he could gather blackmail material that could be used by his intelligence handlers to influence global politics and business. This would explain his seemingly untouchable status for so many years and the incredibly lenient deal he received in 2008. It would also provide the most compelling motive for his murder. If his cover was blown and he was about to be exposed in court, he would have become a liability to the agency he worked for, which would then have both the means and the motive to eliminate him. Variations of this theory suggested it wasn't a state intelligence agency, but a private network of powerful individuals who had him killed to protect their own secrets. These were the men whose names appeared on his flight logs and in his infamous Black Book. a personal phone directory filled with contact information for the global elite. While this theory explained many of the strange coincidences, it remained entirely circumstantial. No concrete evidence ever surfaced to prove a conspiracy. No whistleblower came forward. No smoking gun was ever found. It was a narrative built on connecting dots, interpreting anomalies, and a deep-seated distrust of official institutions. A final, less common theory offered a middle ground between suicide and homicide. It suggested an assisted suicide where Epstein was either coerced or convinced to take his own life by someone who promised his family would be protected or his legacy somehow preserved. This, however, seemed to require as much coordination as a murder plot. The aftermath of Epstein's death did little to resolve these questions. It left a void that was quickly filled with more speculation and suspicion. The legal focus shifted to his alleged accomplice, Ghislaine Maxwell. Her arrest in July 2020 and subsequent trial were seen by many as the last chance for some measure of accountability. Maxwell was convicted in December 2021 on charges of sex trafficking minors for Epstein. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison. During her trial, prosecutors painted her as Epstein's indispensable partner, the one who used her social status to lure and groom vulnerable girls. But her trial did not provide the full picture many had hoped for. The list of powerful men who associated with Epstein was largely kept out of the courtroom. The trial focused squarely on Maxwell's actions and her relationship with the victims. For those hoping for a grand unmasking of Epstein's entire network, the trial was a disappointment. It answered the question of Maxwell's guilt, but it left the larger conspiracy untouched. In the years that followed, civil lawsuits and document releases continued to shed more light on Epstein's world. Thousands of pages of court documents were unsealed, including depositions, emails, and excerpts from Maxwell's address book. These documents confirmed the proximity of many powerful people to Epstein's orbit, but they rarely provided conclusive proof of their involvement in his crimes. The names were tantalizing. They included politicians, royalty, and titans of industry. But being in Epstein's address book or on his flight logs was not by itself a crime. Each revelation seemed to add another piece to the puzzle, but the image remained frustratingly incomplete. The fate of Epstein's vast fortune also became a point of contention. A victims' compensation fund was established, paying out over $125 million to more than 150 claimants. But the full extent of his wealth and how he truly acquired it remained as mysterious in death as it had been in life. His properties were sold off. The Manhattan mansion was purchased, and its bizarre artifacts were removed. The private island in the Virgin Islands went on the market, its temple-like structure a silent monument to the dark secrets it held. The dismantling of his physical empire was a public spectacle, but it did nothing to dismantle the questions he left behind. The Metropolitan Correctional Center, the site of his death, was shut down in 2021 due to its deteriorating conditions. The official reason was to allow for much-needed repairs, but many saw it as a symbolic closing of a chapter, burying the scene of the crime under a bureaucratic order. The case of Jeffrey Epstein ultimately became more than just a story of one man's crimes. It became a symbol of a justice system that appeared to work differently for the rich and powerful. It exposed the dark underbelly of elite society where wealth and influence seemed to purchase not just luxury, but impunity. His death, whether by his own hand or another's, served as the final perfect cover-up. It ensured that he would never face a jury. It meant that any secrets he held about his powerful associates were likely buried with him. The lack of a trial, the lack of a cross-examination, the lack of a public reckoning, all of it was erased in a single moment in a jail cell. The official story is that of a system that failed. The competing theory is that of a system that worked exactly as it was intended to, protecting the powerful by eliminating a threat. Both possibilities are deeply unsettling. One suggests a level of incompetence so profound it beggars belief. The other suggests a conspiracy so vast it is terrifying to contemplate. To this day, the file on Jeffrey Epstein remains spiritually, if not officially, open. The key questions linger, hanging in the air like the ligature in his cell. Was his death the final act of a desperate man, or the final move in a deadly game of secrets and power? Who were his co-conspirators? Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted, but the scale of the operation suggested a much wider network of enablers, recruiters, and participants. Were they ever truly investigated, or did the immunity deal from 2008 and Epstein's subsequent death protect them forever? And what of the intelligence angle? Was Alexander Acosta's comment a simple misstatement, or was it a brief, unguarded glimpse into a hidden truth about the nature of Epstein's power? Was he a monster operating alone, or was he a tool being used by forces far greater than himself? The lack of definitive answers has allowed the case to become a canvas onto which a society can project its deepest fears about power, corruption, and the nature of justice. What do you think really happened? Was it a clear case of suicide made possible by a failing institution, or do the strange coincidences and unanswered questions point to a darker, more complex truth? Share your theory in the comments, and if you enjoy unresolved mysteries like this, like the video and subscribe for more.